Gamchi Lakwan, which is Yankala Kalapuya for what's up, folks. Welcome to DiversiTV, the weekly interview show from broadcast, recorded at the U of O campus and broadcast over Lane TV. If you are new to DiversiTV, welcome. If you are part of our growing legion of fans, welcome back. DiversiTV's mission, and we choose to accept it, is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. To that end, we've looked at race, gender, equity issues, as well as systems, and we're continuing a systems focus with our guest tonight. Our seasons roughly are equivalent to LCC terms. We've been doing this. This is our 12th season. So roughly we've been doing this for 4 years, over 80 shows. This season we began with James Florendo, a Wasco native who is the steward of the LCC Longhouse, which had just opened up. Last week we had Misa Kawai Joe talking about cross-cultural alliances. And this week we have Chris Helm, who's an advocate with Womanspace. I was recently asked to do a diversity training for Womanspace volunteers and had an eye-opening look. I thought I knew about Womanspace and found out I only knew the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. You can visit them on the web, both at womanspaceinc.org and on Facebook. Womanspace's mission, that we believe that each person has the right to lead a life free from violence and fear of abuse. All people have the desire and capacity to control their lives. We help people who are in difficult and abusive situations, empowering adults and children who are victims of domestic violence. We offer support services as well as education and training to the community, and they're operated by a committed core of volunteers and a compassionate staff dedicated to eliminating domestic violence in Lane County, Oregon, and beyond. If you go to the website, you'll see events, an events page and an events calendar. You'll also see a jobs page in case you want to join the work as a result of what you see here or on the web. And there are volunteer opportunities as well, ongoing. Our guest tonight is Chris Helm. She's an advocate for Womanspace, and she's been involved with Womanspace for nearly 2 decades. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So, where are you from?
I'm originally from England.
Where?
Durham, in the northeast.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So, how did you come here to Eugene?
Well, that's quite a long story, but the short end of it is I met the person I'm now married to and came here with him 42 years ago.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So, long time.
A long time, right. So I'm very much a resident of Eugene.
What drew you to the work that you're in with Womanspace today?
I, by profession, have been a teacher all my life. And as a teacher, I worked at a school here in Eugene, the Opportunity Center, for many years, and I worked specifically with teen parents there. And I became very aware of the number of youth that I was working with, who were in some way or other impacted by domestic violence.
As witnesses or targets?
Both. As young people growing up, children growing up in homes where their parents, there was a lot of fighting and arguing and trauma. Teaching youth, I was a health teacher, and dealing with healthy relationships and safety issues with my students, and then also beginning to notice the number of the teen parents who were in my program who were involved in unhealthy relationships. And so I thought, well, I need to be educated about this. And so about 17 years ago, I took part in the volunteer training.
Okay.
And
at the space?
At Womanspace, as it was at that time. And from that evolved my passion for this work. And so over the years as a teacher, I was able to use the materials and the information I was learning from Womanspace to use that in my work as a teacher. I retired from teaching about 5 years ago and increased my amount of volunteer time at Womanspace and realized, hey, I may as well give more hours to Womanspace, and so I joined the staff there 4 years ago as an advocate.
I can see where we've had kind of parallel paths because you know, you were at OC, I was at Churchill, more or less the same time period, and the folks that I encountered, at least because I've been doing alcohol and drug work and doing alcohol and drug work there, there's, you know, it's health, it's, you know, relationships, it's, you know, you wonder, okay, I wish there was some kind of training so that you could get a parenting license, you know, and along with, before the parenting license, like a relationship school, you know, get your picker software upgraded periodically so that a lot of the work that we're finding we're having to backfill gets done.
You know, and I was fortunate to be working at a school in which I could teach a class on relationships and I could teach a class on parenting. So I felt very fortunate there to be able to be maybe a forerunner in doing some of that stuff.
So how has, so what is an advocate specific to Womanspace?
Okay, I can start first of all by saying what it isn't. An advocate is not a counselor, not a counselor at all, and it's very important to recognize that. I consider myself a support person for the women that come to our agency. And so I do a lot of listening. It's a very, very important part of my job to listen, to let the women who I talk to know that they are the experts, to empower them to make the decisions for themselves, to help them to recognize that they have this knowledge and strength within them to do this, and then to offer them resources in the community so that they can go out and find the answers to some of their questions. And then I think as an advocate we do ongoing support. We have one-on-one meetings with our clients in which they may need emotional support on an ongoing basis. They may need somebody to accompany them to court or to to go with them to meet with an attorney. So those are the kind of things that we can do. But the basis of what we're doing is empowering women to recognize their own strengths and abilities and basically take back their lives so that they can move forward into a healthy situation.
I like the message in what you've said in terms of, you know, they have that wisdom innately, but they may not believe that they possess it, and you know, to bring it out and to, you know, affirm it and acknowledge it. So in the work that you do in the context of moving from OC to Womanspace, being an advocate, and in the evolution of the agency, how has that changed?
How has my role changed? Well, in some ways there's a lot of similarity, because I think that the work I did at OC entailed a lot of empowerment too, particularly in the role of a health teacher, where I was working on self-care and in many different forms. And so in that respect, I'm still doing that same kind of work. And I also, at Womanspace, co-facilitate support groups and co-teach a parenting class. And the support groups, I think, are very similar to the classes I taught. My style as a teacher was to be a support person and to encourage my students to talk and share and and to be respectful and all the kind of healthy characteristics that we want to encourage young people to have. And I think that's very similar to the expectations we have in our support groups as we are supporting women and educating women around the issues of intimate partner violence.
Tell me about that shift in terminology. Very slick you did that. The shift in terminology between domestic violence and intimate partner violence.
It's a terminology change that has really just started to move into our agency. I think that it's important to recognize that when we look at domestic violence, we're looking at violence within the home that can occur by unto anybody in the home. It could be violence from a child towards their parent. It could be violence from a grandparent to a child and parent to a child. Intimate partner violence is creating a little bit narrower focus for our agency, where we are focusing more on the violence that occurs between two intimate partners, two partners that are involved in an intimate relationship, whether they be married or unmarried, whether they be a man and a woman in an intimate relationship, woman and woman in an intimate relationship, or male and male in an intimate relationship. That's what we consider to be intimate partner violence.
I'm glad you've had that inclusive definition there, because certainly in the work that I've encountered, there had been a lot of secrets within discrete, diverse populations around talking about that. You know, that was the elephant in the room that they didn't really talk about. So narrowly focusing to intimate partners, any kind of intimate partner.
Right.
Yeah.
Although our agency is focusing primarily on working with women. The statistics tell us that 95% of the reported cases of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, I think it's probably talking about, are man against woman. And most of the literature is written that way too, unfortunately. But because of that, most of our clients are going to be women. And we are able to provide total services to women who have male partners and women who have female partners. We do not provide comprehensive services, however, to men who are being abused either by their female partner or by their male partner.
Who's doing that work?
Well, we will, a man can call our agency and talk to the crisis line. And if possible, we will then refer them to CAFA, who is providing some support for men. Men may also be provided with some advocacy, so they can make appointments for a one-on-one advocacy meeting with an advocate. Again, the outcome of that would probably be a referral, but we don't want to be totally excluding men. We do want to be inclusive at some point, but we are not going to be the best agency to serve males who've been abused.
I was asking that not only to illuminate the fact that it happens, because, you know, as you pointed out, the data show 95%, and that's what's reported, but that also means that 5% there could also be the tip of an iceberg, which indicates a need for not so much greater advocacy by Womanspace, but for, you know, a male space,
a man
space, right? Because, you know, certainly, Elaine, we get that a lot. You know, well, we have a women's center. Where's the men's center? Yeah, okay. Well, you know, y'all want to get together in a group? Well, no. Okay, well.
Exactly.
You need to get it together, you know. We can provide the space, but you need to actually kind of step up and, you know, sooner or later maybe we'll evolve in that direction. But, yeah. So what about the power and control wheel? So I think I have a graphic of that, and we also have that on the cams. So let me, here we go.
So the power and control wheel that you're seeing or will see is primarily designed to recognize that the core issue in intimate partner violence is power and control. And it exists because of the power differential between the abuser and the I'm going to use the word victim at this point, although it's a word I don't like.
Yeah.
In fact, let me talk about that for a moment. When I'm working with women at Womanspace, they are survivors. Anytime a woman, or a man for that matter, picks up a phone, walks in our doors, and advocates for themselves in some way, reaches out for some support, they are a survivor, as far as I'm concerned. It's a very empowering term. It's a term that the women I work with feel good about. Victim is not an empowering word, and so we don't use that term. However, at some point we do have an abuser and we do have a victim, and that's where the power differential exists. So it's really important to recognize that it's a power and control issue. And so as the diagram shows, there is ongoing coercion that is going on all the time. And so for some women that we work with, they may have been in situations where they have been manipulated or abused from childhood, and the impact of that can carry through into their adulthood and through their relationship or relationships, multiple relationships, where they may be being exposed to violence of some form or other.
And they think, and because it has been from childhood, that becomes like
it
home
becomes normal
and normalized. Yeah,
totally normal,
right.
Which is it makes it a very difficult thing for women to recognize when they accept it as normal. It also makes it really difficult for them to want to make changes, because what feels normal and comfortable is something that it's hard to leave.
Yes.
And so because of that normality, because of the routine, ongoing pattern of coercion that exists in homes, and the normality of that, we often will have women coming into our agency who will say, I'm not really sure I'm in the right place because I've never been hit. So what you can see from the wheel is that there's the ongoing coercive tactics interwoven with occasional physical and sexual violence. That occasional physical sexual violence, or threats of physical and sexual violence, creates fear.
Yeah.
You'll see that as an important word on that model, because it's that fear of further physical violence, or threats of losing the kids, or threats of suicide, that keep a woman trapped. And what that does is ultimately she loses her freedom. And so the removal of liberty is a huge part of this coercive control model.
This is, well, one of the things, what you just said, okay, so the abuser is threatening suicide. Possibly. And, well, wait, why wouldn't I want to get away from you? Go ahead, do it, please. Get out of my life.
Good point. However, it's important to recognize that this is an intimate relationship. Right. An intimate relationship that exists because at some point there's been love.
Yeah.
There's been a connection, a positive connection. If an abuser, if on your first date an abuser hit you, or if on a first date your date put you down and treated you badly, there would never be a second date. There would never be a relationship that occurred. So there's a connection that occurs between a man, between a woman and their partner.
Yes.
And that connection is difficult to change. There develops a bond with that person. That bond is strong. And so if and when an abuser may threaten abuse or even threaten to leave, that creates fear.
Right.
Then what's going to happen? I love you. I want our relationship to work. I want to work at just making this a good situation for us. And so there's many attempts to mend the problems that exist in the relationship. But because you have this power thing going on, and the woman may not realize that this power thing's going on at all. She may just feel like, well, it's normal to start with.
Right.
And I think culturally we have expectations that the man is going to take charge, the man is going to tell us what to do. And so there's some of that going on too, right. Where and also the abuser may say things like, well, I'm doing this to help you. I want you to be a better person, and if you could only change this, this, and this, then our relationship would be good. And so then the woman starts to blame herself. Because that's what she's hearing from her abuser, that's possibly what she's hearing from society.
Yeah. And she's internalized that.
And
too.
she's internalized that
right.
deeply,
right.
deeply,
right.
because of the cultural impact of it, because she's being told that by the person she wants to have a good relationship with. So it gets really complex and very confusing for a woman to be in this situation where the person she loves and wants to have a good relationship is at the same time the person that is abusing her. And especially when the coercive tactics don't involve physical and or sexual violence, then she doesn't always recognize that this is abuse. But I show that wheel, that coercive control model, to a client who arrives at our agency for the first time, and she looks at it and she says, whoa, all of these things are happening in my relationship. And I never realized that this was abuse. Yes, maybe he's putting me down, maybe he's calling me names, but doesn't everybody do that sometimes in their relationship? So there's a lot of minimizing,
right.
there's a lot of rationalizing and denying that this is really a problem.
So then within that, how do you get to empowerment?
Well, I think when we talk about removal of liberty, when we talk
Go back
about
to the shot.
we talk about the fact that a woman has had that freedom removed from her, she starts to realize that, yes, she's lost herself. Yes, she's lost something that she once had. She used to be an independent person. Maybe she'd had a good job, or maybe she'd been going to school. Maybe she had owned a house. And what has happened over the time that she's been with this abusive partner is she's had that freedom removed. And so as we talk, what I, as an advocate, am going to be doing is helping her to realize that she deserves to live a life free of this domination, free of this intimidation and fear, and that she deserves to live a life free so that she can make decisions for herself. And as we continue to talk, initially, most women are going to feel a need to talk about what has happened in the past. But what I want to be able to help them to do is recognize that what is happening right now in the present is really what we can focus on. Right. And right now in the present, as they recognize that they have a right to freedom, they have a right to live a life free of abuse, there starts to become a movement inside the woman that she realizes that what advocates are saying to her or what she's hearing at support groups is something that she wants. It isn't necessarily an immediate thing that happens, that suddenly the woman is going to feel free to leave her abuser, feel free to go out and move on with her life on her own. It could be a long process, but there's a seed planted as she starts to recognize that she has rights, to make decisions for herself. She has the right to live a life free of abuse. She has a right to make decisions herself. Sometimes women will come to our agency and they'll say, you know, I don't have any idea what I like to eat. I know what everybody else in my family, I know what their favorite food is. I know what their favorite flavor of ice cream is. I have no idea what I like.
Yeah.
Or she'll say, after maybe she's left her partner, she'll say, I don't know how to go into a grocery store and shop because I don't know what to make for dinner. Because a lot of that decision making has been removed from her. That's the lack of freedom that she's had. Women will describe it as feeling like they're in prison, feeling like they're in a cage, and they can't get out. And so, anyway, back to your question, that seed of empowerment is planted on a first visit to Womanspace. Some women with that amount of knowledge are able to move out, and with that recognition, move out from their abusers, leave their abusers, ask their abusers to leave, and are able to move on. Other women, it takes longer. And our support groups are a really, really valuable thing for women to attend on an ongoing basis. Some women will come for a year or more on a weekly basis, sometimes more than once a week, to get the support of the group of women, all who understand this coercive control model and all who understand that they want freedom in their lives. And it's an incredibly powerful thing to see the support growing within the group. The facilitators are only a very small part of that. It's the women who together create that power and that energy, and are able to by telling their own stories, by recognizing and acknowledging everybody's fears and emotions and pains, are able to recognize that they're not alone in this. A lot of times women really do blame themselves for what's happened in their lives, for what has happened for their children. They're very, they feel very guilty that their children are having to be exposed to the traumas that they're exposed to.
Yeah.
And so they blame themselves a lot. And so being in a room full of other women who have had similar experiences really lessens that loneliness of feeling like you're the only one that this has happened to because there's something wrong with you. And when you know that it's happened to all these other women who are sitting with you, and week after week you feel the energy, the positive energy that is in that group.
How long do groups last?
They're 2 hours. We have 3 of them each week.
Okay. And time, are they open-ended?
They're open-ended,
Okay.
and there's no, you don't have to let us know you're coming. You can call our crisis line and find out the details of it. We do encourage women to meet with an advocate before coming to support group, but it's not critical.
In listening to you talk, and when I hear about being in prison, right? And because a lot of women do go to prison or come out of prison and come out of these relationships, I kept getting reminded of both the book and the movie The Color Purple. And the phrase, at least among African American addictions practitioners, of addiction is slavery. And so that issue of freedom, where slavery was normalized and the abuse was just part
Normalized.
of was normalized, and then that became exported to the larger society, even when technically slaves are free, and then it got also exported to the general culture. Maybe that was the general culture, basically. You know, that slavery.
I think
piece.
male dominance
Right.
has been the general culture
Right.
for at least Western countries,
Yes.
and that, unfortunately, I think still exists. Even though we, as women, have fought for freedom and liberation, there's still a cultural impact on many, many women that the man is still the dominant person in our society, in our lives. Women will talk about feeling the man walking through a doorway and how he fills up the whole doorway, even if he's only 5'6" tall.
Right.
And yet he comes in as this big person because that's the power thing that they experience.
Right, and you have to go through him to get whatever is on the other side of the door, even if that's freedom. So yeah, that reticence to leave the abusive situation, even though it's killing you. And so even if the abuse is only his addiction, which he won't let go, because I hear that theme. I can't leave him because, you know, he's drinking and he's killing himself, and
So I think that the term addiction we have to be careful with.
Well, I'm talking about the actual drug addiction, right? Because I hear that theme, you know.
So you're talking about drug and alcohol addiction and how it impacts domestic violence. Well, okay, so if we start to address that, it's important to recognize that an abuser chooses to be abusive. They choose to be in this position of power. That's a very, very important part to recognize. So with that choice, we recognize that whether drugs and alcohol are involved, whether there is an addiction, whether there's a mental illness, whether there's a history of abuse in the family, those things may exist, but those do not cause the power and control issue that exists in a relationship.
I didn't mean to imply that at all.
Okay, well, I'm glad I got the chance to say that, though, because that's an important
that's
thing
very
to
important
say.
Point,
the choice thing is really, really big, and that's where we have to recognize that it's not the woman's fault that her abuser is choosing these patterns of behavior, these ongoing patterns of coercion in particular, and manipulation that put her in this position of no power, of prison.
And it's important for me to make the distinction, you know, having raised the issue of addiction, that, hey, some people getting clean and sober actually makes them more abusive because there's more consciousness involved and that more of the element of choice.
And it definitely is a factor in many situations, but doesn't have to be.
How do we factor in, this is DiversiTV, so, you know, how do we factor in the rubric of diversity, however you want to define that, and how does the agency begin to address that? Because, you know, culturally speaking, you know, when I look at, for example, STD prevention, if your culture doesn't even talk about sex, you can't really do STD prevention. If your culture doesn't acknowledge that domestic violence, intimate partner violence has been enshrined within it or replicated within it, how do you even begin to talk about that across a language barrier, across barriers of class, barriers of other types of cultures, however you define that?
Intimate partner violence impacts everybody. Intimate partner violence impacts people from all walks of life, from all cultures, all religions, all sexual orientations, languages. So that's an important thing to recognize. All economic groups also, all educational groups, it's important to recognize that a professor at the university, a doctor, can both be an abuser and can be a survivor of abuse. Similarly, somebody in high school, not having finished high school yet, or maybe never having graduated from high school, somebody who is homeless right now, can also be abusive and also be abused. So there's a huge diversity. Every person is, unfortunately, has the potential to be abused. There's no discrimination. Domestic violence does not discriminate. So that, I think, is maybe one answer to your question. As an agency, we don't discriminate either. Any person who wants to come to our agency, we will provide support for them at whatever level we can. And if we are unable to provide the support that they need, then we will do referrals to other agencies to provide what is most appropriate for them. As far as language and as far as the materials that we present, I think, as maybe I mentioned earlier, a lot of the materials are written from the perspective of the white male being the abuser. And maybe our society tends to think of the poor people as being the victims. As an agency, we work really hard to remove that discrimination and recognize that we are there to serve all people who need support, and that's where our focus is.
So when those services have evolved over time, so not the stereotype, I'm trying to think of the image. When I think about Womanspace back when I was working in high school, it was a hotline. It provided shelter, but that's all I knew about. So how have services, what kind of services are available? I mean, because you talk, okay, homeless woman, university professor, what kind of services are available to all?
So,
and how have they evolved over time?
So how has it evolved? So Womanspace started as an idea in 1975 when a group of women got together and realized this is something that was needed in Eugene. By 1977, a shelter, a safe house, was opened in Eugene. And so that is quite a long history right there when we look at that. The shelter, which still we still have a safe house, and that is one of our services, is in a confidential location and always has been in a confidential location. And for many years, that was the, as you said, that and our crisis line were the main services that we provided to this community. In about 1997, I think, Womanspace had access to another space where they started to develop the advocacy center. And so from very small beginnings, we developed an advocacy program. And actually, going back, because I forgot, at that way back, there was also support groups. When I first started...
But not at the shelter house.
No. Those were in community places. I started my work working on the crisis line and also working in support groups 15 years ago. And those were held in churches mostly at that time, in community spaces. So once we got this new space where we could develop the advocacy center, we also were able to have our support groups in that space because that was a public address. It was not a confidential location. So then the support groups and the advocacy centres started to grow, and our administrative offices were in a close, right next to that building. And then the wonderful thing that has happened in the last few years is that we have a new building, and so in 2005 we moved into our present space, which is at 1577 Pearl, and we have a wonderful space above the Girl Scouts and Ophelia's place, and we have our administrative offices there, and our advocacy and our support groups. And the other program that existed way back, I keep forgetting these things, is our Turning Point program. So for a long time we had the shelter, we had the crisis line, we had the support groups, and we had the Turning Point program. And the Turning Point program still exists. And
What's that?
It is a program, it's a case-managed program where women who have left their abusers are given the opportunity to have support on an ongoing weekly basis from one of our staff members who case manages and provides goal setting and support in every area for the women that are in the program. It's a wonderful program. It gives them a full year of, at the first particularly, once a week contact with a support person, a case manager who will go with them to court, who will be able to help them access housing, helps them when they're in need of extra food or any of the other resources that so often women are in need of when they are no longer living in the family home, or they've lost a lot of the money and the resources that they had when they were in a relationship with their partner. So the Turning Point program is a great program. So those are the programs that now exist. The safe house in a confidential location, and then the rest of the programs operating out of our advocacy center at 1577 Pearl.
Now, I know you didn't want to go into this, but as an example, in terms of looking at the agency evolution, so group of women get together in 75 and start talking about, okay, what do we need? Hotline. There's more. We're not alone. Hotline. Shelter house. Advocacy. To case management. Right. All of this is funded through there's some state support or governmental support, donations, because I see fundraisers, etc. What would Womanspace look like if it were funded at the level of police, fire? I mean, certainly the ultimate goal is to end violence, but
yes,
we have the kind of, we've been dealing with this issue for, since time immemorial in one sense, and it looks like we're going to be dealing with it for at least the next 20 years, but it would be nice to eliminate it in the next 20 years. So if we're going to do that, what would the future kind of look like?
Okay.
What needs to happen that isn't happening now? Because the case management piece, I really like being in social service. Because great, that's smart. Yeah, when's the relationship school opening up?
So more case management, more money for that program. I did forget one more program that is really important, that has grown a lot in the last few years and is a very important part, is the youth and community education part of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have a developing youth program. We have youth educators that go out into the schools. We have programs in our building that...
This is not just public schools, charter schools.
Wherever we are invited to go, we have youth educators that will go. We also have community education, so we are going out into the community and speaking to as many groups who want to be further educated. And I really think that this is the direction to go. I think that it's easy for society to minimize the impact of domestic violence. We've had a lot of deaths recently in our community.
That make the news,
That make the news, and sometimes the fact that it's an intimate partner situation is minimized. It may be just kind of labeled as, oh, normal domestic problems, instead of recognizing it as a serious problem that exists in our society.
That can be addressed.
That needs to be given space, like you're giving us today, to be able to talk about this issue. So educating people to recognize that nobody should be subjected to this kind of violence. No person in an intimate relationship should be afraid of being killed by their partner. And so recognizing that this happens in our society, in Eugene, Springfield, in Lane County, in Oregon, is very, very important, and not mislabeling it. Calling it what it is, calling it intimate partner violence, and saying it's not okay. Going out into the community and saying it is not okay. We will not tolerate this. We will not tolerate this in our community. And so the more education, the more we can get out and educate every aspect of our community, whether it be the police, whether it be the spiritual community, whether it be in schools, and starting to educate from a young age, letting children know that this is not okay. This is not okay if this is happening in their homes. Speaking out and telling the world this has got to stop. So I see that as a very important thing. I think that there is movement to do that. I think that we are going out and speaking to, we spoke to a bank recently. We're going to DHS, Department of Human Services, and speaking to them. We speak to the police department, and this is really important. The more publicity we can get for people to recognize that it's not okay. It's not something we are going to tolerate any longer.
And we're not going to tolerate it, but it can actually be stopped and addressed.
But it takes everybody working towards that, and it takes everybody speaking about it, speaking out about it, and not turning their back on it and saying it doesn't exist, because it does exist.
Whole communities and specific communities. One of the examples that I use, both in my ethnic studies classes and also this training that we just did, by looking at, usually our attention to this issue only comes with high-profile things. So, for example, throwing in race, class, DV. So I use, for example, the whole Nicole Simpson's murder. So what the media focused on, and if we just consider this a case of domestic violence, high profile. So the black community knew that he domestically, beat his black wife, and his kids witnessed that. So of course he would, not of course, but it's not surprising to see what happened with Nicole. But I think what made me angry is what I call the Nicole number. That if every 9 days in LA County a woman is killed by an intimate partner, and that 650 plus women have died since Nicole, nobody's done anything about that. And the number in Lane County was given at the time as 1 every 3 weeks, right? And so that's a constant rate. And so, and it's preventable. And so there are conditions that both hold that in place and that allow that to happen that aren't being addressed, that you are addressing, but they're being tolerated, essentially. And that's what's holding it in place. And so where's the moral outrage?
And so calling that, Nicole, situation domestic violence or intimate partner violence right from the start, instead of sugarcoating it with other terminology.
Right.
Also recognizing something we haven't mentioned, the impact on the children.
Yes.
You mentioned his children. Children are traumatized, and children are impacted by the abuse in their homes, and can suffer post-traumatic stress disorder and other difficulties in school, etc., etc.
Right.
And we've got to recognize that that's not okay either.
Right. As well as replicate the problem.
Exactly.
Right. Besides self-medicating, all the other things. Yes. What? Where does the field need to go?
Well, as I said, I think public awareness is probably the most important thing. So public awareness and stopping blaming, stopping the blaming of the victim, stopping the blaming of the survivor, whatever terminology you want to use there. Recognition that abusers choose their behaviors. Recognition that an abuser deliberately chooses to maintain this position of power.
Right. It's not an accident. It is a choice.
It's not an accident. It's a deliberate choice to maintain power. That power differential in our society is something that would be a good thing to address. We talked earlier about what a healthy relationship looks like, and a healthy relationship developing where partners in a relationship have equality. Recognizing that equality in a relationship is important. Everybody deserves that. A woman deserves to have an equal say in a relationship with her partner. That is what I would like to see for the future. If we can move towards that, if we can not only educate society as a whole about the dangers of intimate partner violence, but also at the same time educate society about what a healthy relationship looks like, about what equality looks like, and how we all deserve to have equal rights, and we all deserve to live in freedom, with freedom.
How can people help the work at Womanspace?
Well, we have...
Or your work in particular?
We really, really love volunteers. We have a volunteer training, obviously, that you were involved in. Our volunteer trainings are held approximately 4 times a year. We rely strongly on volunteers to staff our crisis line, to help with our youth programs, and then to expand into working in the advocacy center and also in support groups and various other areas also. So volunteers is one area that we would love to have people join us in this work. Money is always another very important thing. We write a lot of grants, which is very competitive right now. Right. It's real hard to come up with the finances to continue to fund some of the programs that are essential. We have to cut back occasionally on some of our programs. We have to cut staff occasionally because of our programs. And so we have fundraisers, and we would ask that community members contact our agency if they have donations, or if they would like to help us with our needs financially. Then I think the other thing, the bigger issue, as we've just talked about, is just to talk about this, to not hide it, to not ignore it. That if you know your friends or neighbors are having problems, don't turn and look the other way, but address it. Talk to your neighbors, offer support, in whatever way you can. So talking is critical, in order for us to move forward in this field.
I want to thank you for coming. This has been great.
You're welcome.
This has been great. If you like what you've seen, write us, email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. Put DiversiTV in the subject line. Tell us what you liked. Tell a friend about what you saw. You can also contact Womanspace. I hope the graphic got built, but it's www.womansspaceinc.org. Friend them at Facebook and participate in any way you can. Until then, go well, stay well.